Hello, everyone. Today, I will be interviewing Alycia Wright. I am super excited about this interview. I've known Alycia for years. She's been a part of C maybe since the very beginning, or at least very early on, and she's been a part of the C admin team for a long time. I have followed Alycia's story throughout the years, and it is a really interesting journey through homeschooling as she has worked hard to make sure that her kids have had the best education that she could provide them. And I'm really excited to have her share part of that journey with all of you. Hi, Alycia.
Hi, I'm super excited to be here as well, Blair. So thank you.
How long have you been in C? It's been a long time.
I was there pretty early on, like I think within the first few months, definitely
Yeah,
within that first year.
yeah. And so this is Alycia is a C admin in the Facebook group, and that is really important. Alicia's been a really important volunteer for C, and I don't know how you do everything you do, to be honest. So we'll get into everything you do in a bit, but let's get started by having you tell me a little bit about your kids and how you came to be homeschooling.
Sure. So I am the mother to four beautiful, bright, kind daughters, human beings, and their ages are 20 and 16 and 14 and 10, soon to be 11. So I last year I could say I had a child literally at every, different sort of what we consider sort of educational grouping, elementary, middle, high school, and college. And this year my youngest is now moving into middle school. So no more. I'm done with the elementary years.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
yeah, it feels so weird that three of my daughters are sort of in their, early adulthood and late and, sort of middle and mid-teens that in a couple of years I can sort of see, or at least I'm trying to figure out what this life will look like for me.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're as busy as I am, so there will be some other things that you fill your life with. So, your story of how you came to be homeschooling, I've always found really interesting. So, do you want to share it with everyone?
Oh goodness. I mean, I feel like I have more than one story actually. But initially when we began homeschooling, we it was a matter of economics. That's one story anyway, where my daughters, my oldest two, were in a Montessori school. We were spending a lot of money. We had number three who was heading to kindergarten, and I just found out we were expecting number four. And so we realized that we were going to be making negative dollars from my public teaching salary. And as much as we loved our Montessori school, we were going to have to figure out something else. And the public school was just not an option for us. And so I figured I've got a master's degree in education. I can do this.
Oh my goodness.
And we
And
began
and
homeschooling.
and you've homeschooled. So I just want to clarify, you've homeschooled since you've homeschooled your oldest to college, you've actually homeschooled every grade, correct?
Just about. My daughter went to college a little early, so she didn't finish traditional high school. I mean, we had basically done it, but I mean, I wouldn't say she was like in that grade necessarily. But yes, I've been homeschooling from diapers all the way up.
Have you had to differentiate learning for each of your children? And what about learning together as a group or a family?
That's a great question. Because my daughters are so different and their needs have been so different, I definitely have had to think about each individual child and what their needs are and what their learning styles are, and even just what our relationship looks like. Because that can play a huge factor in how you approach homeschooling and how you approach teaching different things. And so, my firstborn, traditional firstborn, pretty eager to please. My 10-year-old gives me a little bit of a run for my money, but it's all good. My traditional thought, though, is that you do the history and the science together. This made a lot more sense, especially with my 16 and 14-year-old, right? It's a little bit more difficult to do it with the one who's significantly younger when she's 8 or 9 years old. You can still do it together, but it just looks a little bit different. You've got to find ways to make it a lot more hands-on and just developmentally appropriate for younger children. So I always encourage people, if you've got children that are somewhat close together in age, even 3 to 4 year span, to try to tie it in and just accommodate for the children as their needs are.
So, do you have any additional tips for people who are homeschooling multiple children?
Yes. One tip, one huge thing that's really helpful is to let your older children help with the younger children, right? I was talking to a mom here yesterday, and she was saying that she really felt like her life was, really busy, and she felt like she wished she was spending more time reading to her child, she knew that they would benefit from that. And I was thinking, well, you've got a strong reader right there, let that one read to the child, encourage them. And then that way it sort of helps on both fronts. It helps the older child practice their reading skills. And when you're reading to someone, you tend to add in some of the things that you might not add in when you're reading by yourself, which are like the intonations, right? The reading with expression, the reading with different voices, when you're reading different characters, all of those fun things that you read aloud when you're reading to someone else. It's sort of like you're acting in a play.
Okay.
The same thing can easily happen with math.
Okay.
You
So,
know,
how have you had your girls work together on math?
well, actually, when by the time they come to me, I usually ask, "Did you ask one of your sisters?" With a young one, especially if I'm in the middle of something, and I often am. We'll sit down and do a lesson together, and I'll introduce the lesson in math. And then I'll usually leave her to do some practice problems. And then if there's a question, but especially if I'm in the middle of doing work or in the middle of a call, and she has a question, my first question may be, did you ask one of your sisters? Because there's a built-in resource right there. And in all honesty, it's a great way to keep those sisters sharp in the skills. But also, one of the best ways to really know that you know something is to have to explain it to someone significantly younger, or someone who really has no idea on what to do next. And
No, that's
so,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I think
using each other basically.
yeah, because you learn more teaching than any other way, I think. So cool. So you have gifted learners with high academic needs, correct?
I do.
So how has that affected your homeschool journey?
I think uh, a really good researcher, meaning I am constantly scouring local and the state events to find opportunities for my children that might, even if we have to drive a little bit, if I feel like it's a good fit or if it's something that they want. I wouldn't even necessarily say that I have, I mean, I do have gifted learners, but I think what I have more than anything else is I have children who are self-motivated, and they know what they like and they know what they're interested in. And so then I feel like as a parent, the best thing I can do is just to facilitate as many opportunities for them to dive deeper or have exposure to those things as possible. My husband and I both said pretty early on when we had children that, one thing that we were in agreement on is that if our children showed any interest or talent towards something, that we would do everything we possibly could to get them as much exposure and access to those things. We felt like growing up, we both had parents or family situations where our families maybe could not do as much due to work or mental health or what have you. And so it's something that we both, you know, really wanted to make sure that we gave those gifts to our children, just being present and doing as much as we could to help further along their interests.
Yeah, anybody who does not follow Alycia on social media, you get around.
We
Send
do.
it,
Guilty.
if you send us the links, we'll put it in the show notes because I see your reels in your Instagram feed all the time, and because it's homeschooling in Virginia, right? Right? Isn't that
Yeah.
what is your
Homeschool. Homeschool
yeah,
life NVA.
yeah, and I don't know if I can keep up with you. Maybe in my younger days.
Listen,
Um,
it is a challenge, I find. I find it's becoming more of a challenge. I feel like when they're younger, it's a little easier. As you get teenagers and older and youth become older, it becomes a little bit more difficult because the commitments that they have are just that much more, I don't know, deeper, I guess. And so, until they're driving themselves, it can become a lot. I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to get this 15-year-old here, and how am I going to get the 14 or 16-year-old there, and how am I going to get the 10-year-old here? Versus when they're younger, you can sort of group them all together a lot more. As they get older, they start having their own individual interests, and it's a lot harder to group them.
yeah, that was sort of where I was headed. As you were explaining this, I thought, oh, I hadn't really thought about that as an interest-led issue where
Hmm.
four kids with four different interests, and I could see how they become very passionate about why theirs is the most important. So it would be hard to group them. But so we've talked about the interest part. What about things that you feel everyone should know and that they're not interested in? How do you handle that?
We have some sort of non-negotiables in our house. And some of those are things like learning to swim, right? Everyone's going to learn to swim because that's a safety issue for us. And it's just something we believe in. And we also understand the statistics around, Black people and drowning because of lack of access and swimming. And, the same kind of goes for some other things, right? So in general, I really insist on, sort of three things when they're really young. It's we're reading every day, right? Either I'm reading aloud or you're reading something, and reading can look a number of ways, right? We're writing every day, something with our hands, not necessarily on the computer. So we're using these muscles, we're strengthening up, and then we're doing some sort of math every day, right? And that can look very much like real world math, that we just automatically count, but we're doing some sort of practice with numbers um, every single day. And so those are the things that I really push. Um, and I feel like, once you learn to read, then you can read to learn, right? Then you can read the science books or the things about insects or dinosaurs or, whatever it is you're interested in. You can read about historical figures and people and times. But I think, helping kids build up their self-confidence and those literacy and phonics skills pretty early to us is very important.
So I actually know your children, all except for
Yes,
your
you
oldest.
do.
Science. And are your kids all, and I know that they have this history rich uh journey because I follow you on Instagram. So
Mhm.
are they just interested in that, or are those interests of yours that you then have, said that are important to them? How one of your daughters is really interested in making a difference for the climate crisis. Yes,
Mhm.
or
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Oh,
do think that oftentimes when you have young people, that they are influenced by the conversations that happen in the home, right?
mm.
And so the things that are important to you by extension become important to the child because they're constantly hearing it, and it becomes a big deal. As they get older, though, sometimes they pivot and find their own interests, and maybe those things are still important. So I do think their father and I influenced them pretty early on, and the things that we found were important, and I actually think that's a good thing because part of those are our values, right? Like we value the earth, we will be good stewards of the earth, that sort of thing. We value culture and identity, and so those are going to be things that they're constantly hearing from us and participating in, and hopefully um, used to that, they'll also be passionate about it. But sometimes, they aren't, and that's okay too. I have one daughter who is not really into a lot of STEM and tinkering, and that's okay. Um, she is, well, I mean, that's the climate change daughter. So I mean, I guess she is technically. She's just not in the same way of like robotics and computer science. This is a child who really doesn't want to use the computer ever.
Well, she actually, I know, has the foundation and the knowledge around climate change. But I think I think there are a lot of people that feel that if you really want to make a difference, it's on the policy end. And so a
Yeah.
political science focus actually probably makes more sense if,
And I think
or
that's exactly
business.
where she's headed. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see. Or, business where you understand how you set up a successful nonprofit that's going to tackle some of these things. Um, so, okay, so it sounds to me like you have created a kind of my favorite thing. I'm working on an article about it right now, is how to create a culture of thinking. And it sounds to me like you and
Mm.
your husband had just naturally have this culture of thinking where you're talking about things that matter to you and things that matter on a larger scale, and you're bringing your children into that conversation. Am I getting that
That's
right?
exactly right. Yeah. I think it's really important to try to find, and I get it, as my life has gotten hectic, we're not always as consistent as I want to be these days, but at least when they were younger, we were really consistent about having sit down meals together, and using that time as conversation time to bring up different topics. Also, of course, like, tell us about your day, so how are you feeling, but also just general topics, academic topics that we were interested in, and discussing those. And I think that sort of back and forth has really helped create children who are comfortable having conversations where you might have to, pause and think about what your response is, because someone may be waiting to say, to sort of push back or encourage, or ask you where you got that from. And I think that level of communication has been really helpful. And I start to see it now as they become teenagers and adults, that they are used to thinking critically about different topics, and most importantly, listening and thinking about your response before responding.
I love that. So actually working on the skill of being good at dialogue and with
Exactly.
listening and discussion. I don't think very many people think about that when they're working with their kids, about how important that is. And
Yes.
part of the thing is you've got to be a good listener. To teach your child to be a good listener, you have to do a good job of listening to them. And I think adults fail that
Mhm.
sometimes.
Yes.
You're
And I've been guilty of failing it before as well.
when my son has made forays into things that I don't totally agree with, I work really hard to listen because I also know, he's young. Um, my husband I'll sometimes nudge him under the table, like, be quiet. This isn't your moment to in the dialogue. Okay,
Yeah.
so you are homeschooling kids. Let's say they have high academic needs, and it can be really challenging. Some of what we're talking about would be perfect with these kids because not that all kids aren't thinkers, but these are kids that are craving that sort of thinking challenge. But do you have any other advice for homeschoolers who have kids who are similar learners?
I think not falling into the ideology that because they can do something that they should be doing it, right? It's sort of that idea that yes, they could read Harry Potter, right? I'm thinking like the thickness of the book or little kid, but is that really the best like literature or developmentally appropriate thing for them, right? I think sometimes people fall into the trap of, well, your IQ is here, so we should be pushing you to do all of these advanced things that other people are doing, instead of and letting them enjoy childhood, enjoying the literature that's meant for their age, um, enjoy the activities that are meant for their age, and knowing that it's okay. It's not a race. It's okay to let kids move at a pace that you may feel like they could be moving faster, and let them actually slow down and go deeper. I feel like
That
that's the benefit.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. So when my son was an early reader, just consumed books. And I can remember being at a family dinner when he was just about to go into fourth grade. And I said to my sister-in-law, who taught fourth grade at an award-winning school, I'm not sure what to do. I've got this third grader, but he's really a third grader reading at a college level. What do I do? And she said, well, you go for breadth. She
Hmm.
said, sure, he could be reading it. You could, keep going into higher and higher, but what about just going for breadth of topics and information? And that was one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got from education, because I think we tend to think in terms of this linear progression
Yeah.
without realizing how expansive every single discipline is as far as just the amount of information and knowledge within it. So everyone's going to want to hear about your child who's not just graduated, isn't she already she's 20 and advanced degree? And you want to tell us a little bit about your child's journey after graduating?
Okay. Well, I mean, what's really interesting is that Alex, do you mean graduating high school or like which graduation are we talking about?
High school,
That's the question.
like, tell us a little bit about it.
Actually, she never graduated high school, believe it or not. That was something that, I had a hard time with because she enrolled in the early college program where you leave high school and you go straight to the college, but you don't get a college degree. I mean, we're homeschoolers, so I could always just write one up, right? But technically, she didn't. She just enrolled straight in. And then I remember, we were sort of at a thing when I thought, if you don't graduate college, what does that mean? Like, do you actually have a high school diploma? Like,
You mean you don't graduate high school, right?
yeah, you don't graduate high school necessarily because the program is open to, traditionally public or private school kids. And so those kids leave at 13 or 14 years old and they go into this college program, but you don't get a retroactive high school degree is what I'm saying. So as homeschoolers, it wasn't as big of a deal because we get to write their degrees. Like I could just say I'm graduating you, but I remember thinking, could that be an issue? But she graduated last year. And I like to tell people it was on her 19th birthday. So it was a wonderful birthday. And she had a bachelor's in science with minors in math and physics. And then we did a gap year because she's young and needs time. And here's the thing again about like, could you just go straight into another, graduate program? Sure. Should you? Maybe not. You know, Alex hadn't learned to drive yet, hadn't really had a job outside of working, in the library at school. We just miss so many things that you get in those, 15 to 17 years that she decided to come back home and do a year of adulting, which I was really grateful for because I felt like as a mother, I had missed a lot of those years. Like I missed first dates, I missed proms, I missed, like we just didn't get any of that stuff. And so, it was a really wonderful year, the year of adulting. She came home, she contacted the local university to volunteer her hours at one of the STEM labs. She started working with the local math and science center, doing outreach programs to youth. She was doing some online, I don't know, activities. I'm not exactly sure what all. She just had a great year. She ended up getting her first car, getting a driver's license. She worked at the co-op with me. So that was fun. So she came to work with me at the co-op. She taught STEM, of course. So she ran 2 STEM classes every week here at the co-op. It was just a great year. And then a couple of weeks ago, we dropped her off. She's at Duke, and she's doing a PhD in bioengineering neuroscience.
My advisor in my graduate program left UCSD and went to Duke. So yeah. It's a really good
That was
school.
one of the programs she got into. That she got into US San Diego, and I think she was really interested in it. But Duke gave her a better financial package, so that's where it
That
came
is
down to.
too bad. UCSD is fantastic. So I would have liked it because then I would have gotten to see you more. So the gap year, I think sometimes makes some people nervous. Sean also took a gap year and
Mhm.
he didn't really want to. My husband thought I was wrong, but oh, I was so right. I just, You had a lot of growing up to do. I honestly think that if someone looks at their 18-year-old and thinks, this kid has a lot of growing up to do, they should like give their kids the
Yeah.
year to do it. Because once you're in college, college really then funnels you into your job, right?
Yeah,
I think a
it does.
year when you're, 18 or 19 years old is a really gift. It is a gift to give someone. So
It
you're
can be.
able,
The key with gap years is that you really need to sit down with your young person to make a plan, to figure out, okay, we're taking this gap year. What is that going to look like? What are some of the things you want to do? Like map this out. And then if you plan to go to college, how can you, and you don't have to, but one thing that I would find beneficial is how can you use this gap year to make your college application even stronger? Like, how can you sort of dig into the area that you want to go into? Make sure that you're actually interested in it, right? Maybe it's a gap year of you volunteering in an area that you potentially want to, study in college or go into as a professional. So really, um, gap years can be great, but I really feel like when they aren't great, it's because people haven't really thought about what it is they're using this gap year to accomplish.
okay, that is a fantastic tip for everyone to make sure that it's of use and to check out and see if it's really what you want to go into as a before going to college. I love that. I
Yeah.
absolutely love
A gap
um
year of TikToking and YouTube, not so great.
not so great. So you're able to look back. How do decisions that you made with Alex affect your homeschooling with your three kids who you're still homeschooling?
Oh,
What did
that's a great
what did you
question.
do or worry about or, or what
You
didn't you
know,
do now?
as I think all of us, in just life, in raising different children over time, you change. A lot of times as a new mom, you are a little more neurotic because everything's new and you're super afraid that you're going to mess every single thing up and you're, kind of, hyper focused on little things. And I was definitely that way in the beginning. You know, and like most of us have become relaxed over the years as I'm thinking, oh, it's okay. Like it's all right. It's sort of like that drive you take home with a newborn, right? You're super cautious, you're looking around, and now you drive, you're just like, wait, are you in the car? You're like, put your seatbelt on, I'm already rolling though. So um, you just experience helps. But I will say that I do think that, my uncle gave me some advice once years ago, and he said, if you get that first one straight, the others will fall in line. And I thought that was hilarious at the time, but I think there's actually some truth to that. I mean, I hate the idea of getting anyone straight, but I think if you sort of set a tone, or start building the culture that you want for yourself and for your family, then the children who come will automatically be raised up in that culture, right? So you sort of figure out what it is you want this life to look like for you. Not necessarily what you want it to look like for the child, but what you want it to look like for yourself or your family, um, and then build those things in as you go.
That's really good advice. Kids are it's really, so I have grandkids and there are three grandparents who live really close to each other. Well, my husband lives with me, and then his first wife. And it's really interesting. And when the grandkids are at different, her house or our house, is how they behave differently. And if my
Yeah.
husband's in charge, how they behave differently than if I'm in charge. It's just they that's sort of the rules and your personality within that. It's interesting. I find it really interesting just to watch how the kids respond way differently to that. So I could see your uncle's advice, how big and profound that could be for, the parents with the older kids. So creating community has become an integral part of your homeschool journey. Will you tell us a little bit about cultural roots and how and why you started it?
I started Cultural Roots Homeschool Cooperative because I wanted community for my children and for myself. I've found that the communities I were a part of were not really meeting my needs. They weren't really, I mean, they were okay, but I knew they could be better. Right. And honestly, I found that it was probably around the time of, I don't know, one of these election seasons. And I remember thinking, just in this one of the spaces that I was in, that I wasn't really being fully who I am. And it became very clear to me when I had a parent come talk to me about something. And I remember thinking after I listened to that, I thought, they have no idea who I really am. Because if they did, they would have not have made any of these assumptions. And then I'm thinking, what made them assume these things about me? Right. So then I thought, I'm clearly not in the right community. I need to find a different one doing, to somehow give off this idea or these things. And what do I need to be doing differently so that people see me as who I truly am? Like, how can I be more authentic? And so that really started the search for, just other people in the homeschooling spaces who were like-minded. And by that, I meant, we did not necessarily homeschool for religious reasons, not that we didn't partake in various, religion, but that we weren't homeschooling because of religion. And we weren't homeschooling to necessarily stay away from certain types of people. And we weren't homeschooling because we were anti-government or, any of those things. Um, and so trying to find, sort of like-minded people, that was really the impetus. And also to find communities for my daughters. I found that the first few years we were homeschooling, a lot of our friends went off to public school, middle school, and my daughter was left really without a homeschool community. And so as I had young ones in tow coming up, I knew I needed to really focus on building something so that when they got a little older, and those shifts started happening, we had a community with other people who were dedicated to the long-term journey of home education.
So, and they're so lucky. But that's how I formed C. It wasn't that I didn't have friends. I just didn't have anybody that I had enough in common with when it came to homeschooling. What's really interesting is that some people I knew, I didn't realize we had as much in common as we did, because when I started C, they joined C because they were looking for the same community. Anyway. It's interesting how that'll happen. You probably found that as well, that once you started
Yeah.
creating this, people said, I want to be a part of that. Who you were like, oh, I didn't realize.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you find your people once you start, letting people know exactly who you are and what it is you're trying to do, and you start creating the culture. Those who are drawn to it will come. Those who are not will not come. And that's okay. That's totally fine too.
oh
So
yeah.
I think it's just being brave enough to just step out and saying, and you don't even have to say it. I mean, you can say it through through the types of curriculum you choose, through the books you choose to read, for the field trips that you choose. I mean, it'll be evident when people sort of look at what you're doing, sort of what your values are and what they aren't.
Yeah, I like to have a strong statement, just because
Mhm.
it's like, I believe that it's fantastic, all the differences of humanity, but that might not, but not looking for a community that's trying to be everything to all people. And so it's like, so if this isn't the
Yeah,
community, for you, okay, I hope you find one that makes you happy.
yeah, exactly.
Satisfies
I even
your soul.
offered, yeah, I even offered to help people, build their own communities. I mean, that's a large part of what I try, because I understand that not everything is for everybody. Right. And that you want to build something that's a good fit for your children. I mean, that's why we're all here. And then we're hoping that others will, be like-minded and want to join. But for instance, even within Cultural Roots, we have different cultures. Our high school program that we launched last year is totally different from our K-8 program. Our K-8 program is very exploratory. There's you come, we hope to inspire you or deepen you into your passion area. Our high school is an academic high school. And so sometimes we may get families who aren't necessarily looking for academic high school, but we just try to be very upfront. This is an academic high school. They will have, assessments. Now those can look a number of ways, right? They could be project based, but there will be assessments. Some people don't really like any assessments. And so this may not be a good fit. There will be homework or assignments outside of class, and the expectation is that you will do them. Some people don't like that, and that's okay too. We are really trying to prepare children here for whatever path they choose to go, and that includes, college.
Well, yeah, or a job, because you've got things you have to do for a
Or
job.
right, just interaction. Yeah, living your life. Exactly.
So managing this large, active, thriving co-op has to require a lot of time and effort. I was really glad that you were able to meet with us, actually, because I know you're so busy. But homeschooling in a way that meets the needs of all of your children also has to require a lot of time and effort. How does a
Yeah.
working mom, homeschooling mom like you balance everything?
In all honesty, I'm not sure it is balanced. And that's okay too. I feel like you go through seasons. I mean, I think, there are some seasons where it's 70-30, some where it's 50-50, some where it's 90-10, some where it's 100-0. And I think that's realistic. That's just how life works. I think what you do is just try to make a concerted effort to check in with your children, to try to stay on some sort of pacing, but understand that, it's your pace. It's whatever you make, however you decide to make it work for your family, right? We don't follow traditional Monday through Friday. It's Saturday morning, Sunday night. It's when we can get to it, because we may have other things that I may find go back. And I try to teach that to the children too, that, you're not going to always be able to give your all the time. And moms don't either.
Cool. So what advice do you have for homeschoolers interested in starting a community? Because I'm pretty sure people are going to be listening to this thinking to themselves, wait a minute. I want that. I want to find my people locally. What would you tell them?
Yeah. I encourage people to figure out what it is you need for your family. That's going to be what you're most passionate about. That's going to be what you're willing to work long hours for, even if you aren't like necessarily getting paid or, getting anything, financially in return for it, because you want it for your children, right? There's not much we wouldn't do for our children. And once you start building what it is you need for your children, those who are looking for the same things for their children will be drawn to you, will want their kids to also experience it. I know sometimes people don't like to get on social media, but it's a wonderful tool for sharing what it is you're doing. Because if you don't share what you're doing, it's going to be really hard for people to find you. You could be doing the most amazing things, but if no one knows, it's no one knows. So you've got to be willing to share what it is you're doing. And, social media is the best tool that I know for that. But also just being out in the community, letting people see you doing the amazing things that you're doing, or even if it doesn't seem that amazing, I mean, something really small could feel amazing to someone else because their option might be the kitchen table or the living room that they're in all the time. So I feel like people really just want opportunities to explore, opportunities to come together, to build friendships for their children, but also friendships for themselves. Homeschooling, Blair, can be very lonely. Um, some of us live in pretty rural areas. Some of us live in areas where maybe safety is a concern. So maybe you're not out as much in a very urban area. Some of us live in areas where maybe there aren't a lot of people who think like us. And so because you're in a minority, you're not as comfortable sharing what you're doing or what you're talking about or what your interests are. But that's the only way those who do think like you can find you. And I promise there's someone else who thinks like you somewhere out there who's feeling the same way. And they've just got to connect. I use that Batman light all the time. Like, you need to shine your bat symbol so people can find you, and you can start to build community together. We have land in a pretty rural area. And this year I mean, it's an area where as soon as you drive, you see all the signs. Um,
Uh-huh.
yeah, you see all the signs, you see all the Confederate flags, you know, when you cross that line where you are. But in that area, there is a little small little Montessori school that sits in what used to be a Black elementary school. And it's a predominantly white little Montessori school. But, you know, we've been in touch to offer some of the classes that we offer at Cultural Roots there. And we've had a really wonderful response. And I'm like, wow, where are all these people coming? Like, who, like, I didn't even know this community of folks who are like-minded in a lot of ways existed in this not so welcoming place. So it just, you know, it tells you that there are people out there, even in spaces where you feel like, oh my goodness, I'm by myself. They've just got to find a way to come together.
Well, I love the idea that you had where you could let people know what you're looking for, like by showing them what you're using. So you could just make a social media post with the history of the science you're using that clearly says, this is I'm secular, or this is, you know, where I am, how I align, and who I would want to study science or history with.
Mhm.
I think you could start there. So you teach, so let's stick with the co-op for a minute. What about tips for homeschoolers looking to join a secular co-op? What should they look out for? What questions should they ask to help them find a good fit for their family? What do you wish more people would ask when they join Cultural Roots? Like, what questions should people ask?
I think, you know, asking to see people's organizations' handbooks are really helpful if they have one. Some organizations so small they may not have a handbook, but a lot of times in those handbooks, you'll find core values. You'll find, um, you know, sort of like a snapshot of who they are. Not necessarily who everybody in the co-op is, but the leaders of those who are making the offerings in those handbooks. You'll kind of get a sense. But I think just asking, you know what it is you're looking for. Just asking, um, how many students you have here are neurodiverse? Do you have supports, or would you welcome me to come and join my child's class because they have a difficult time, dysgraphia, and maybe I want to help support them in writing? Like, is that allowed? Is that okay? My child needs to move a lot. Is that going to be an issue here? um, I think just being very upfront about what it is you need for your child, or the type of space that you want. Or if you say, we don't really celebrate, Halloween, is that something that you guys are going to be doing here? Like, is that, we don't really do X, Y, and Z. Um, or you do these things. Is that something, is it going to be a big deal if we try to do this? I think just whatever your concerns are, asking them, it's really helpful. And if you kind of scare people away, it's okay. They probably weren't the right people anyway. But it's better that than get in there and then you wear your pride shirt and then you realize, oh, this is an issue.
Yeah.
Because you never asked the question. You just assumed, right, that these were your people, and you find out, oh, these are not my people. But by then you could probably, if it's a young person, damage could already be done, right?
Right.
Psychologically, emotionally. So I think just um, asking people pretty blatantly up front. I think, sometimes cults will have statements of faith, and that'll be a sure sign, that you may or may not agree with. So taking that seriously. Um, yeah, I think, trying to ask teachers questions too sometimes will be helpful, especially in a science class or a history class. If they're talking young Earth, old Earth, like different things. You're like, wait, what? Um, yeah. I mean, we
Yeah.
had a science teacher tell my daughter that the earth was getting hotter because the Bible said it would end in fire. Right. And that's cool, but that's her belief. Right. But I was like, what? She didn't believe anything about climate change. She didn't believe humans had any contribution to it. But then I knew this is not the right class for us, right? And we needed to find something else.
Yeah, I agree. Just asking. It was really hard the first time I did, but I was thinking of signing my son up for a physics class, and I just picked up the phone. That's the other thing. You can email or
Yeah.
call, and if they don't answer the email, bump it. But if they don't answer it a second time, assume the answer is, I'm not even gonna, I don't even respect this question enough to answer it. That's where to take it. But I reached out by phone to call this person that had this physics class. We had just moved down to San Diego from up in the mountains. And I said, so is this going to teach my son, that physics proves the existence of God? Now, you have to know that that's something that people will try to do to even ask such a specific question. But I was told absolutely they were going to do that. I was like, thank you very much. And he did not take that physics class. So be really specific with your questions. And Alicia's right, whatever is concerning you. And I want, obviously, I was going to make sure that it was secular. So in
Yeah,
addition to everything else you're doing, you teach classes on OutSchool.
I
First of all,
do.
there the classes are extremely popular. If you think of signing up, don't wait. But first of all, how did you decide to teach those classes? I know you teach Zen out of Zen. How did you decide to teach those classes, and why? Why add this? Well, other than financially, I
Gotcha.
motivated to teach them for any other reasons or whatever. So tell us a little bit about that, the classes and
Yes. Um, yeah, and I'm going to go back and just say one last thing, and then I'm going to go into your question. I want to just say that when I mentioned my daughter in her science class, I wanted to say that for me, being a secular homeschooler does not necessarily mean that I don't have faith. It just means that I prefer that it's not intertwined with my academics. Okay. And any academics really. And so that's why I'm so, very strict on keeping those things separate. So when a teacher starts throwing religion into any other core academic class, and my little radars go off, and I'm like, no, 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 because I'm going to do, I'll teach my children what I want them to believe. And
so
that's sort of,
there's a lot of C
yeah.
homeschoolers that yeah, that feel that way. That's why
Mhm.
I call our community a-religious. We're not anti-religious.
Yeah,
We don't want religion in our kids' academics. We'll
exactly.
work on the philosophy at home
Yes.
or
Yeah. Leave that to me.
something else.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Classes.
So yes, I do teach on OutSchool. We've been on OutSchool since 2016. So since it started, really, my children started taking classes pretty early on. And let me tell you, OutSchool has changed drastically over the years. As homeschoolers, I think it's for the better, but I do miss some of the old days because they were sweet days back before, the pandemic and what that looked like. But
Well,
that's actually when I.
were
Mhm.
you at the conference in West Virginia where Amir came and gave a talk on the founder of OutSchool, everyone came and gave a talk on how to use online classes, and I remember sitting in the audience and people were like, so you just use your computer to go to school? Now we can't even imagine that. Yeah, those are
I
the
know. No, and I feel like that was the first conference in West Virginia. And I don't remember what happened. Something happened where I couldn't make it because that's super close to me here in Virginia. So I was so bummed. And then to learn, that Amir, that was like the first introduction you guys had to him. So, I guess technically he's one of my bosses now from the many places I work. But I started teaching Howard Zinn, A People's History of the World, because honestly, the adult version is one of my favorite texts. And I will say everything uh, has, history always has some bias no matter what, right? So, there are issues with just about everything, thing in life. But it's one of the better texts that I've found. And I read it in high school, and I did it again in college. And when they came out with a young people's version, I think I was teaching middle school, but I was teaching at a public middle school, and there's no way in the world they were going to let that slide in there. I had to use the approved history book. But when we started homeschooling, I was like, this is the book we're using. Um, it also helps that I had some family members who knew Dr. Zen. So that was kind of a cool connection too, who'd gone to the Spelman where he taught for a couple of years. And so I just really like the way in which that textbook goes. It's not a traditional textbook. It's told sort of like in story format, which is why I really appreciate it. It's not like list of vocabulary words, your 5 questions in the back. Here, it's and I love that each chapter is really told from the perspective of a group that has been impacted, um, most impacted by whatever the event or policy or person in power or decision making is. And so that's why I teach those classes, because I truly enjoy them. I think I have the book memorized now, literally in my head. I can say, turn to this page, this chapter, this paragraph. And I've over the years just come up with activities to go along with it. And so it's just an easy class for me. And I really enjoy hearing students engage and hearing their opinions and hearing their thoughts. And what I found over the years is that a lot of times parents will participate in the classes as well. It's sort of in the background. And every time I teach, I always have probably 2 or 3 parents that are kind of sitting adjacent to a student. And it's just really interesting. When I taught the class on C, Blair, the policy there is a little more flexible than, say, in out school where only this person enrolled. But I remember one time I taught a section on C, and the grandma joined in oftentimes with the granddaughter. And it was one of the most beautiful classes because the grandma would chime in with all of these stories. She's obviously a bit older than me, that she had from her personal experience that she would share with the class. And I just thought, this is like we need like intergenerational classes. Like, I don't know how to make that happen, but it was like, and I've had that happen a few times when I taught on the C platform, and those were the best classes.
Oh my gosh, that must have been
Yeah,
absolutely fantastic. But I could see adults saying, I never got this history. I want this history for me.
exactly.
Well, so you will be
Oh
glad to
yeah.
know that I know of at least 2 districts in California that use the adult version in high school classes, high school honors
Right.
history classes.
Yeah.
Yeah, big difference between Cali and the Southeast.
Yes. Yeah. Big difference. Yeah. We're using, I don't know, whoever the publisher is, the giant curriculum publishers. But yeah, those were some of my best classes because we had, parents chiming in, talking about, when we talked about September 11th, it was really interesting where the moms could directly talk to the kids and the parent about where they were on that day and what their thoughts were and what their memories were around that. And then, some of the grandparents talked about, growing up under Jim Crow. And a lot of them were some of the white families, and talked about how they didn't question, they just didn't, as a young person, this is just sort of like the set of rules, but then coming to their own self-actualization, and even sharing some really, um, family stories that were just like mind-blowing, of just, you know, the culture of their family, the culture of their small towns, and, growing up with this. And then now as adults, how they're raising their children, how they're raising their grandchildren. I just think those were just amazing.
I think those would be really important conversations. A lot of
Yes.
people are afraid to have those conversations because they think, because there is this sort of a thing that happens on social media where
Yeah.
you become a participant in something that you either were a child when it happened, so you had no control over it, or, it's like your great grandparents or something. And that's a shame because I think honesty around some of those stories would be really important in that narrative. Like, I mean, people who are white and who understand that especially in past generations, the benefits of white privilege, but
Mhm.
you don't see enough conversation about that in a way that's healing to everyone. Yes, no, am I
Yeah.
wrong?
No, I think it's true. I mean, we were so lucky because we had families where, um, one, relative had been in a
The reservations that I've been on, they call them boarding schools.
okay, a boarding, yeah. So we were, really lucky that we've had even diverse families share, hard stories when we were reading through. So we had a Native family talk about, what it was like for their mother to be in a boarding school, to basically convert them to Christianity and to strip them away from their, Native culture and have them sort of adopt all these new things. And so I think, what I find to be most valuable, homeschoolers, but also anyone, is creating spaces where you can have these conversations around your family and your history and how that history intertwines with US history or history of the world. I find that dialogue to be just priceless. And that's a lot of the types of things that we're trying to have here at Cultural Roots as well. Like, how do you go back to get those stories that have been lost? But how do you also relate those stories to the bigger story of America, to the bigger story of wherever you're from within the various diasporas?
So anyone who is interested in Indigenous history, I'm just going to recommend something I've done on 3 occasions, and it is an organization called Remember up at the Lakota Sioux
Mm.
Reservation in South Dakota on Pine Ridge. And within the context of the volunteer work that you do for a week, they take you to the different they take you to a boarding school. They have someone who was forced to attend the boarding school speak. And so there's the Indigenous history is still, I think, one of the more undertold parts of American history. I think,
Absolutely.
I think the history of African Americans, that the work that's been done with from the African American community has been just has been more effective in getting those stories told. But again, it might be where I live.
No,
Do you
I
think?
actually I would agree with you in that resort, that I think a lot of times indigenous stories and native people are often seen as people from the past, as if they don't exist anymore. And so then people don't tell the stories. And they also don't highlight the current successes of indigenous
Right,
people and native
right,
people.
right.
And so that's a huge problem as well, right? Because again, it's always as if this people who are no longer here and we're just telling these few stories, but it's such a rich culture, and it's multiple cultures, right? So I mean, it's expansive. And so I think there should definitely be more work done
Yeah,
to promote the stories.
yeah, yes. We need to be telling, I think we need to begin insisting that our history reflects the peoples in it, right? I mean, I live in a state where the majority of the people aren't white.
Mhm.
They're Hispanic. And so if you were to look at history, the history we're having kids learn shouldn't mostly focus on white people because
Yeah.
that doesn't have a lot of meaning to the kids who are studying it, right? History should be about
Yeah.
having personal meaning.
People must, yeah, children in particular must see themselves in the stories. And understanding that, of course, you're going to be learning stories about other peoples at different times, right? Because that's what world history is all about. But you should also be learning about how your um, history, ties into that. And sometimes that is, largely family stories. But it's nice, it's really needed to also be a part of the main story, right? The outside of your family story, right? To be seen in books, to be seen in curriculum, to be seen in celebrations. Yeah, totally
So
agree.
why don't you give everyone some tips? So there's going to be people listening to this thinking, yeah, but how do we do it? and this is something that you have been very successful at with Cultural Roots, is incorporating these stories into kids' learning. You want to tell people at home how they might do that as well?
I mean, what I'll share is that what we do at our co-op, and so if you are an organization, this this may or may not work depending on how diverse your organization is, right? Uh, and so we are a very diverse organization, but not diverse in that everybody has the same background, right? And so we actively, ask people, what are some of your cultural backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds? And then we take that list and we try to make sure that when we're picking book lists, that it includes the places that the kids are from, the places the customs and cultures that make up who the families are. But let's say you're in a space where you don't have a lot of racial diversity, then that's a little harder, right? Because you don't know what to pick and pull. So I would sort of look at your community, just your community at large, like around you. What are the groups of people that are there? And that might take some research, right? So I didn't know necessarily that where we are is a hub for, various refugees from various countries. So we have a population of refugees from the Congo, right? Refugees from, I believe, Venezuela, refugees from Afghanistan. So these areas, and that's largely because they're not necessarily in my everyday contact. And so I wouldn't necessarily know, but that doesn't mean I can't research and find out. And so I would encourage people also to figure out who are the groups of people that are in your community and how do you go about learning about them.
Ooh, that is really good advice. Really good advice. I think I think that's important to do because it also makes you interested in the places that they came from, and
Exactly.
that's really important too. Our news doesn't have enough of what's going on in other countries, in particular South America and Africa.
Yeah, and a
Oh,
lot of times, in communities, or especially if you have a large city that's kind of nearby, usually there are festivals around. Various communities will hold their festivals. I would check to just make sure that these aren't private festivals, but usually the festivals are open to the public, especially if you see them on social media. Just going, maybe patronizing the vendors there by purchasing food, purchasing, books or materials or whatever it is you're interested in, and learning about the groups of people holding the festivals, finding out if they're ways to further connect with groups. Maybe there's a community center that they offer classes in. Maybe not, and that's okay too. But just actively researching, actively trying to find out and learn more about what's around you.
so this was an amazing conversation. Uh, I've got one last question for you, Alycia. If you could go back and give yourself advice when you were first getting started or at any challenging part in your journey, what would you tell yourself?
Relax.
So hard to do.
Yeah, relax. You don't have to be everywhere. You don't have to go to all the things. I really was like, not necessarily fear of messing out, of missing, not necessarily fear of missing out, but it was more so, I feel like a lot of us, I made a post about this and I was talking about a lot of us who are, I'm not gonna say I'm an overachiever, but I'm definitely a very active parent, right? A lot of times that comes from somewhere, right? This is after my own therapy. It comes from either not feeling like you got what you needed as a young person, right? Or
Mhm.
feeling as though you didn't, um, maybe you didn't give someone else what they needed at some point in your life, right? And so there's this constant feeling of doing, 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 doing. You can do too much. You can, and I find that for me, what ended up happening was one year I did this homeschool 365 challenge, which meant you took a picture every day of your home, basically every day. And you, at the end of 7 days, you uploaded a sort of a visual. what started to happen was my brain started shifting into capturing the perfect homeschooling moment. And oh, if we go do this activity, that makes such a great homeschooling moment versus being in the moment. Right. And so I think that can start to happen. Right. You can want to give your kids so much because it feels like, oh, this makes me a good mom. Oh, this makes me a good homeschooler. And then it's all a blur. The kids don't remember. You don't remember. You're tired. They're tired. Yeah, you've done all this cool stuff, but you moved on to the next thing so quickly that it hasn't really absorbed. And then you can finally get yourself a little frustrated with the kids, like, you don't remember it. Da, 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 da. Well, I barely remember it too, because we did like 3 or 4 things that day. And they were all cool, but it was way too much. So I feel like I would tell myself to sit down and relax and drink more tea and have slower days. People say that all the time, that it goes by in the blink, and it really does. It really does. It doesn't feel like it when you're in the mix of it, but it really does. And that
It-
it's going to be okay. The fact that parents are concerned about, am I doing enough, tells me that more than likely you're doing enough.
oh,
Right?
so relax and be present, everyone. Alycia, this
Relax and be
was
present.
absolutely amazing. So much good information. I cannot thank you enough for everything you've done for our community and for this interview. So everyone, that is a wrap. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, click the little bell if you want to get more of these wonderful interviews like this one.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Blair. I enjoyed being here. And hopefully you guys will all take a look at our new film, I Am Homeschooled.
Cool.